right, so here we go with a continuation of the story of World War One. We had talked about the causes. Again, they were a bit complex. I hope you understood all that. If you have any questions, of course, always let me know. What I want to begin with now is what happens once the war started, because I said, they were living this dream, and this dream's about to turn into a nightmare. And to understand that nightmare of World War One, you have to understand how the war is fought and what happens during the war. So we're going to get into some, I think, pretty intense descriptions of the war, but that's the really only way to fully understand it. So let's start with this. On this bottom left map over here, we have the overview map, right? And one of the things you need to know about World War One right off, it's called a two-front war. Why do we call it two-front? Because you have the Central Powers, you have England and France on one side, Russia on the other side, and then the Central Powers, as we talked about, Germany, Ottoman Empire, Austria-Hungary on the other side. So Germany knew this, that they were surrounded, and therefore Germany had a plan that you definitely need to know called the Schlieffen Plan. And what is this plan? Well, you can kind of see it in large over here. And what the idea was to take your forces in a strong assault. Remember, the war starts about August 1914, and move them through Belgium and down into France. Why Belgium? Well, Belgium is weak, and there's a good way to get through there. And so they thought, we'll get through Belgium, get through France, move over to the west, crush the west, and then deal with the east. That's basically the Schlieffen Plan. So they make their way pretty quickly, and you can see this shaded areas. Everywhere you see shaded areas on these maps, that's areas of conquest. And that the Central Powers moved into the West, and they moved through Belgium fairly quickly within a month. And then we get to this river called the Marne River there. And this Marne River is about, I want to say 20 miles away from Paris, if that. Here's Paris, here's the Marne River. They're not that far away. And this is where you have this really unbelievable scenario now is about to unfold. Because the Germans are moving into the west, they're moving in aggressively. They get to the Marne River, they're about 20 miles away, but when they're about 20 miles away from Paris, that's when the Allies, the French and the British, again, the US is not in this war, the Allies at that point get in there and they're able to at least slow them down. They're at least able to stop them. And so you could see that it stops, the progression stops. Well, they have the forces, the British and the French, to stop the German onslaught. What they don't have is the forces to push them back out. And this is where you get this kind of nightmare scenario of World War One. What ends up happening is these two, more than two, multiple powers, these new industrialized military machines all get stuck in this funnel with all this new 20th century technology, 20th century technology that they're going to be using. And what this leads to is they all dig in and we get the first major impact I need you to know about World War One. Because remember, World War One is about impacts, impacts, impacts. And one of the most significant impacts I need you to know about World War One is the style of war that develops as a result of this. And it is, of course, known as trench warfare. So I want to talk a little bit about the trenches. We're going to stay on this slide for a little bit, and I have some terms and a couple names there that you're going to need to know. So this is an amazing photo I found of the kind of an aerial view of the trenches. So here you have like one side of trenches here, you have another side of trenches here. What are the trenches like? What's going to happen? Well, these trenches that you're going to see are dug. They're dug, about 5-6 feet in width, right? They dig about 5-6 feet deep, and then they pile the dirt right on top. And so from where you're standing until the top of the dirt, you have about 10-11 feet. So that's how they dig these trenches, and that's where they're going to get stuck. Now, trench warfare itself is not new. You had trench warfare before. This is kind of almost like a 19th century style. You had trenches in the 19th century. The difference now is this is kind of 19th century warfare with 20th century technologies. What do I mean by 20th century technologies? Well, I mean like these new inventions that were part of this new warfare associated with World War One. Let me go through a few things that I definitely want you to know. So on the mounds of dirt that you would have, and I'm going to show you some really good photos of these as we go through the story here. I'm going to have some amazing photos here. The amount on top of the dirt, one of the things they would do is they have these barbed wires, and so you'd have barbed wires going all the way on the mounds of dirt. So again, you can kind of try to visualize this for now until I show you the pictures. But imagine a trench, you know, about 5-6 feet wide, 5-6 feet deep, a mound of dirt, and then barbed wire on top of it. You could see in the images here, you have trenches, you have back trenches, you know, all these support trenches. Again, if you get a chance to see the movie 1917, it's really good. It's all shot, you know, showing what trenches are like during World War One. So I highly recommend it if you really want to get a sense of that. So that's one. Another really important part of trench warfare were machine guns. This is something that they hadn't really used before in warfare, and now they do. Another one is flamethrowers. That's another good element of trench warfare that was never used before. I didn't put this down on the list, but worth noting, high power artillery shells, which were basically little bombs that would go off. That was part of it as well. And of course, another one that was incredibly important in part of trench warfare was chemical weapons, poison gas, mustard gas, right? That would be used as well. So all of these are part of this 19th century, the 20th century warfare in World War II. It's the World War I. It's the barbed wires. It's the machine guns. It's the flamethrowers. It's also living in these trenches. You know, you have to imagine trying to live in these things. You're in the dirt. You're in the mud. You have rats the size of cats. You're sometimes living in these trenches for weeks and months before you're relieved of duty. When this war started, you know, in August of 1914, they believed it'd be over by Christmas, right? That's when they thought the war would end. They thought it would end by Christmas, August, September, October, November, December, about 5 months. That's what they expected, you know, when the war started. Again, this is not going to happen at all. And so, what's it like when you're in the trenches fighting? Well, as I described to you, it's horrible conditions, crazy new weaponry, and then eventually you have to say, all right, well, I'm going to cross from one trench to go to the other trench. You know, you have to if you're going to make any progress. So I want to try to visualize this. Let's say you have a bunch of British soldiers, as an example, and you know they decide they're leaving their trench and they're going to the German line. And they're on the German line. You have the Germans there with their machine guns, right? And you're a British soldier and you need to cross this trench area between one to the other. That area is what we call no man's land. Why is it called no man's land? Well, because of course no one wanted to be there. And very horrible things are going to happen to you. So you're trying to cross no man's land. You have these artillery shells dropping at you. If you are lucky, some high power artillery shell just drops and kills you right there in no man land. That's if you're lucky. Because what happens if you don't die at no man's land? And let's say I'm a British soldier and I get, you know, 20 feet away from that German trench. I get 10 feet away from the German trench. I'm 5 feet away from that German trench. That German soldier in that trench, he's got his machine gun. He doesn't care about all those, you know, hundreds of guys behind you coming to you. He sees a guy with a rifle. He's in this little ditch. He knows if you get on top of him, he's going to shoot you. If he gets on top of you, he's going to shoot you dead. So what does he do? He takes his machine gun and he aims it directly at you, directly at the person coming at him with a machine gun. Who, you know, it's just, you're going to try to defend your life at that point. And a barrage of bullets would come out of the machine gun with such force, and the angle in which it came out of the trench, kind of upper angle there, it would come up, if there was a person running, it would come up across their torso, and it would literally slice their body in half, where your chest would be sliced in half, your arms, your head would fall, usually entangled in that barbed wire, and then your rest of your torso and stuff would fall to the ground. That's what's going on in the trench warfares. That's what's happening in the Western Front. So all this is in the Western Front that I'm describing these trenches for you. So that's intense fighting that they have never seen before. I mean, the Napoleonic Wars were pretty brutal, but guys, that was 100 years earlier. This is going to make the Napoleonic Wars pale into comparison. You are going to have days, not battles, days where you're going to have thousands of people fall and die in a single day. And as this war goes on, as the trench warfare goes on, this war that was supposed to be over by Christmas goes through 1915, 1916, 1917, 1918. They're still fighting. And as they're fighting in these trenches, hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, eventually 9 million people will be killed. And on top of the 9 million being killed, there are countless more who are wounded, lose their limbs, lose their eyesight. It's just horrific. And they thought this would be over by Christmas. So this is the trench warfare. This is incredibly brutal. Get these last two names down here that you see, Wilfred Owen and Otto Dix, and I'll talk about them in a second. But let me show you some images to really bring this home to you as to what the trenches were like and what the fighting was like in World War I. So this is just an image of just a whole bunch of people leaving a trench, right? So they're leaving the trench and they're going to the other side. There on the other side, maybe some Germans. You can recognize they're Germans because of the pointy hats there that they have, right? This is kind of a machine gun that they may have used. And, they're firing at you. And so you have these, and you can see them in their trenches as well there. This is a chemical gas, right? So, of course, this chemical gas that would be used, mustard gas, is kind of a chlorine, greenish colored gas. That would be what it looked like when it would go over a large area. And so this was going to be devastating during World War I. They had gas masks, right? But look at this gas mask. It's not very good. It's like somebody tied a plastic bag around your head. It's not going to be very effective at all. But it's the best they had, and so they had these gas masks that they used also. And this is one of the most powerful photos I've ever found. I can't tell you how many hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of photos I looked for until I found the one that I want to use for all my classes. And this is probably the best image I've ever seen of a trench, right? And this is what I tried to describe to you. It's about 5-6 feet across, 5-6 feet high. You see the mound of dirt there. You see, where they're sleeping, right? Look how he's sleeping there. You see their supplies, in little boxes over here. And you die. It might take a little while till they bury you. Now, I want to show you, see how observant you are. If you look at their uniforms, this is a British soldier. Now, I want you to look at this, and before I tell you, does anything jump at you when you look at this British soldier, right? From the uniform, that's who he is. Now, look at it carefully. Look at his hand. Look at his face. And what do you see? Look at the color. It's dark. Well, this is a British soldier. It should be white, right? But it's so dirty and so filthy living in the trenches that his skin is just, so dark from all the dirt in the trenches, right? I think that is just an example of how this image is so powerful. So this is what World War I is doing. This is what World War I is like. This is what it's like fighting in the trenches. And so I definitely want you to understand all that because this is really important to understand the ramifications of World War I. So one of the impacts is the trench warfare, but then that's going to have another impact, which we'll get to in a little while, but you definitely need to understand all those components of trench warfare. So I hope you got all those details down, the weapons and everything that was used and what it was like. So this was the before, right? This was the image before. This is what they thought trench warfare was, World War I was going to be. So if this is the before image, I'm going to show you another image, and this is the image I would say is the after or the during. We go from this, what they thought World War I would be, to this, to what World War I really was. This is a powerful photo by a man, an artist named Otto Dix. He was one of those keywords there. And this is his view of trench warfare. So, I try to really describe this well to students. I try to show you images. I try to give you an artistic image of it. But to really fully understand trench warfare, you have to understand it from somebody who was there. And there was an amazing source, a man named Wilfred Owen. Wilfred Owen was a poet. He's like 18, 19, 20 years old when the war broke out. He was a gifted poet, and he entered the war, British poet. As he entered the war, it inspired him to write a poem. The title of the poem is in Latin. It's Dulce decorum est pro patria mori. It translates to die for the fatherland is a sweet and becoming thing. I want you to hear the words of this poem. Listen carefully as I just described the trench warfare to you. Bent double, like old beggars under sacks. Knock-kneed, coughing like hags, we cursed through sludge. Till on the haunting flares we turned our backs and towards our distant rest began to trudge. Men marched asleep, many had lost their boots, but limped on, bloodshot. All went lame, all blind. Drunk with fatigue, deaf even to the hoots of gas shells dropping softly behind. Gas, gas, quick boys, an ecstasy of fumbling, fitting the clumsy helmets just in time. But someone still was yelling out and stumbling and floundering like a man in fire or lime. Dim through the misty panes and thick green light, as under a green sea I saw him drowning. In all my dreams, before my helpless sight, he plunges at me, guttering, choking, drowning. If in some smothering dreams you too could pace behind the wagon that we flung him in and watch the wide eyes withering in his face, his hanging face like a devil sick of sin. If you could hear at every jolt the blood come gargling from the froth-corrupted lungs, obscene as cancer, bitter as the cut of vial, incurable sores on innocent tongues. My friend, you would not tell children adherent for some desperate glory, the old lie. Dulce decorum est pro patria mori. The old lie, to die for the fatherland is a sweet and becoming thing. Those are very powerful words. That poet Wilfred Owen, I sent a link for you in your discussion board. I think it's going to be in, if it's not this week, it's in next week's, that you could read the poem again and look at it again. There's some other really good World War I sources. I think I linked a couple of them for you that I want you to read as you get into next week's kind of source discussions on these. But you know, they're very powerful, and they also tell you what the war did. And you know, I always tell students the most important impact of World War I was not just the 9 million people dead. The most important impact of World War I is that, as crazy that sounds, there's a bigger impact than 9 million people die even, and it was that it's kind of destroyed the soul of humanity. All the optimism, all the hope, everything that they had thought was good is shattered. And you go, well, why does that matter? Well, then this brings about, this is the real impact. It brings about what we call the lost generation, an entire generation that has nothing positive to grip onto. And as we get into the 1920s and 1930s and 1940s, you see when people don't have something positive to grip onto, when they don't have a positive purpose in life, people grip onto really bad ideas. And they grip onto communism and fascism and Nazism, these foulest, most soul-destroying ideologies man has ever created. That's what World War I does. It creates this vacuum of beliefs that then is going to be filled by really bad ideas. And there's still another impact of World War I through the trench warfare. And this is maybe one of the most important ones in many ways. A generation later, you see, a generation later, as World War I is taking place, as World War I is already over, and you see the rise of Hitler, a lot of people in Western civilization still remembered World War I. The wounds of World War I were still so raw that it made people think to themselves, well, we can't get involved with another war. We can't just jump into a war with somebody else. And when Hitler was rising to power, they basically didn't want to do anything. And the result of that inaction won't be 9 million, but instead 50 million people who will die. Many people will be taken because of their faith or their religion or their background, and they will be tortured and murdered and gassed and experimented on like animals because no one wanted to do anything. And we'll talk about this a lot when we get to World War II. But I think the key factors to why World War II happened was World War I. The brutality of World War I was so intense that no one wanted to stand up to Hitler when he was doing these horrible things. And then, of course, you get a much worse scenario. So I hope this is kind of all clear. I hope you're understanding why trench warfare is so important. You need to understand trench warfare because of the effect this has, but you also need to understand trench warfare during the war, but you have to understand the impact trench warfare had after the war as well. So I hope all that's really clear. I spent a little bit of time on this, but I think it's really important to understand and grasp. And these images and the poems are really useful to understanding that. All right. So this is back to our map, and we will go ahead and continue on in our next lecture here on what happens in the Eastern Front and what happens in terms of how the war ends. So we'll break this up into another lecture as we move forward. All right. Thank you very much.